Hey everybody, Brandon here with Galloway Precision. Today we're going to go over a couple installations of our parts on the P290rs, made by Sig Sauer Incorporated. Great little pistol, great little pocket gun. We do offer a tier 1 service on this one, where we mill the slide for an optic. You will lose the rear sight when we do that, but it really brings this platform to the next level. Alright, so we're going to go over what tools we're going to need to start with. Needle oil with some gun oil. We're going to need our 1/16 punches or 2mm punches. Got a couple of them. Flathead, small flathead screwdriver. This one happens to be magnetic. It has a magnet on the rear. You can usually get these at Ace, Harbor Freight, Lowe's, Home Depot, whatever you have near you. They're cheap, $2. You can literally tear down the world with these things, but you're going to need something like that. We're going to have our .50 Allen wrench. And I have our 1/8 inch punch, our pick, brass hammer, polymer hammer. Now the two things we're going to be installing today, we're going to go over the Antioch trigger series. We've got the flat face and the curve. The curve right now comes in red, black, and silver, so does the flat face, so if the blue trigger is a little offsetting. Our anodizer was doing some stuff for us, and I just kind of like it, like showed off. But we're going to install the flat face. Now, the installation for the Antioch trigger series, whether it's a flat face or a curve, is the same. The other thing we're going to do at the same time while we have the gun apart is we're going to put in our performance spring set, and that includes your firing pin return spring, a blocker spring, which is your firing pin blocker safety, and a hammer spring. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. As always, first thing we're going to do, this one has no magazine in it. If you've got your magazine present, drop your mag, rack the pistol to the rear, check physically and visually, no ammunition present. We're going to let the slide come forward. Now, 290 is a little odd in how it breaks down. So you're going to pull the slide back till you line it up with your takedown lever. Take your 1/8 inch, pop out your takedown lever, set it off to the side, and take the slide off. Now we're going to do the slide first, so we're going to set the frame off to the side for now. Since 2 of the springs go on the slide, we'll start with it. Remove your guide rod and your guide rod springs, set them off to the side. Remove your barrel. This is where we're going to get into some fun. Alright, go ahead and take your 1/8 inch punch. Notice you can't press in your firing pin. Why? Your blocker safety is in the way. So, take a finger, your thumb, finger, whatever, push in on the blocker. You'll be able to push the firing pin out of the way enough to where you can move the back plate. Keep a finger over it. I stopped right here. It's going to hold the firing pin in place for right now with the top part of the plate. If you just rip this off though, firing pin might come flying out at your face. Remove the plate. Now if the blocker is good, it's going to do its job. It caught the firing pin. If your blocker is going bad, that firing pin is going to fly right out at you. Now, to get it out, we're just going to go ahead and press the blocker in. Firing pin's loose. Go ahead and pull it out. Now, your return spring and your firing pin are going to flop out. Notice I'm still holding on to the blocker. Ease it out. It's under spring tension. If you just move your hand, move your thumb, your finger, whatever you're holding it with, it's going to fly out. So we're going to turn our slide over, tap it on the bench to where we can get a good enough hold on it. We're going to grab our blocker, set it off to the side. Now, sometimes your stock springs don't want to come out. There's 2 ways of doing this. You can take your pick, pull it out that way, which I prefer that method just because you can get your pick to ever so gently hold in place where the spring will stick on it and you can just pull straight up. Of course, the other way to do it, take a pair of tweezers, reach down in there and grab it. But as always, when you're modifying your pistol, you want to make sure that you keep as much of the stock hardware in good shape as possible in case a warranty issue ever arrives. You crack your slide, your barrel blows up. If you send this into the factory with aftermarket parts, every firearms manufacturer in America will do this. They will return it to stock, and they will keep your parts, and they will send you back the gun. Alright, so we're done with firing pin return and blocker springs. So we're going to set them off in our little parts bin over here. First thing we're going to do is put our blocker back in. Now what I like to do is I will take some snow universal gun grease. You don't have to slather this stuff, guys. It's not 1912 anymore, and while I love my 1911s and they were originally designed with grease in mind back in the day, don't use this much grease on your guns. All you need to do for this, what we're doing is we're using the snow grease to keep the spring in place when we go to insert it. So just put a little dab in there, just like that in the blocker. Alright. Then we're going to take our spring, and you notice how the spring goes. It widens at the bottom, tapers at the top. Stick your tapered end in. Keeps the spring in place. That's what we want, because it can get a little tricky when you go to put this back in. Now, you're going to line it up. And that grease is going to ideally keep the spring in place. If it comes out, turn it over, take the spring back out. This is actually probably the hardest part you're going to come across in the slide. Now, when you go to put the blocker in, I should mention this before I do it, you're going to have a rounded side, and you're going to have a cutout side. Cutout side goes to the inside of the barrel. That's what keeps, there's your interaction. You'll notice a ledge right here. You'll notice a flat part on your firing pin. That's where it catches. When this is pushed up, it lets the firing pin move past it. I'm going to set that down in there. Now make sure that it didn't kink. Don't just go letting it fly, but push it a couple times. You should see inside movement of the blocker. That's what we want. So now, and take our firing pin return spring, put it on our firing pin. I'm going to slide it in. At the same time, we're going to depress the blocker, or as it's known in the SIG manual, the firing pin safety plunger. Now you notice the blocker stops it. It's doing its job. So we're going to take our back plate, making sure that our sideways L, the shape of the cutout, is facing the left side of the slide. You can see where the two cutouts are going to line up. You know you're doing it right. The easiest way to remember, rounded side of the plate, always to the rear. So we're going to get it started. While it sits there, we're going to push in on the blocker, push in on the firing pin, push in on the plate. It's one of those times you're going to wish you had three hands. The way I just did it's the easiest, where you hold the plate and push the blocker with the same finger. I realize not everybody has fat sausage fingers like I do, so you may have to cant your hand up a little more, but that's going to be the easiest way. And then just push the plate home, firing pin will go in place. We're done with the slide. So go ahead and reinstall your barrel, reinstall your guide rod and springs. We're going to set it off to the side. Now we're going to get started on the frame. First thing we're going to do, we're going to take our 1/8 inch punch and our brass hammer. We're going to knock out the sear housing retaining pin. This holds your entire sear hammer housing, basically the action of the pistol, in place. We're going to take that pin, set it off to the side. Next, we're going to take our 1/16 or 2mm punch. We're going to drive out the trigger pivot pin. You guys don't need to beat these things out. All the pins in these SIGs drive from left to right. You don't have to beat them out. They're held in under tension. So don't go getting all crazy and whacking it as hard as you can, because you miss, you're going to hit your polymer frame, and you could do some damage to it, or you could do some damage to the locking block mechanism or anything else. So pull that out. Set our pin off to the side. Now just take your frame, turn it upside down. Your trigger return spring will drop out. That's what it looks like. We're not going to need it for right now. We're going to set it off to the side. Now, we're going to go ahead, and I like to do it by grabbing right here with my finger on the ejector. We're going to pull until we can get enough leverage to grab it and pinch it from the sides. We're going to pull out the hammer and sear housing. Alright, we're going to install our hammer spring here in just a second, but for now we're going to leave this hole and set it off to the side. Now we're going to go ahead and pull out our stock trigger. Now the design of the 290 is a little quirky in the fact that the trigger bar is technically not supposed to come out. It is an armor level repair. If you don't have a Sig armor near you, then this is something you need to send into the factory, because done improperly, and if the wrong amount of pressure is put on this sidewall, you're going to snap that, and then that polymer snaps and your frame's ruined. And since the frame is the serialized part of the pistol, that could lead to some issues. So the other weird design feature is where it connects into the trigger bar. You have your trigger bar return spring down here, and there's your trigger. Now your stock trigger is going to be a little hard to get out, so what we're going to do is we're going to take our flathead, we're going to push over and up at the same time. Again, if you don't feel comfortable doing this, we do install this kit in-house. All you need to do is email me at tech@gallowayprecision.com to find out the details on that. It's a $50 flat labor fee, cost of parts, and you pay shipping both ways. Sometimes it's better to do that than to learn an expensive lesson if you don't feel comfortable doing this. If you feel comfortable doing this, everything I show you in the video, you're going to get by just fine. So while I was giving my little spiel there, the trigger bar went ahead and came loose from the trigger. So we're going to take it, we're done with it, we're going to put it in our parts bin. Now we're going to install the Antioch flat face. Now again, like I said at the beginning of the video, the installation for both the flat face and the curve is the same. First thing you're going to want to do, before we even get this in here, reason we suggest blue Loctite is for the simple fact that it can be adjusted without having to be heated. So remove your pre and post travel screws. The bottom one I Loctited a little bit because I was testing something earlier. If you don't have the tools you need, including the Loctite, we do sell a trigger installation kit for $10 plus shipping. Comes with a little vial of blue Loctite like this, the .50 Allen wrench, and all of the trigger screws, spare trigger screws you may need for this trigger or any of the other triggers we carry. Alright, so we're going to put a little dot in each hole. That's how I like to start it. And everybody prefers differently, and I'm sure people are going to say, no, you're doing that wrong, you only put it on this, you only put it on that. Here's my thing, I really don't want these coming loose after I've adjusted them. So I put Loctite in the hole, and I put Loctite on the screw. That's just the way I was taught. Just make sure one or the other has it, because what will happen during firing is the vibration of the firing will move the pre and post travel screws. And so when you think you're having a malfunction, what is actually happening is the screws moved on you. Alright, so we're going to do the bottom one and the top one. Now, personally, I prefer Vibratite. It sets a lot faster than Loctite, but it's all personal preference. If you don't have a small vial of Loctite, I highly suggest getting the install kit I mentioned earlier, because the entire kit with the Loctite, the wrench, everything you need is about $10. If you try and find those things separately, you could spend anywhere up to 20 bucks trying to get that stuff. You can't just walk into Lowe's and buy just this Allen wrench. You have to buy the entire SAE set. Alright, so we've got our Loctite in, we're ready to put our trigger in. We're going to insert the trigger from the trigger well in like so. Now we've got just enough clearance in the design of our trigger that if you cant the trigger to the right some, you can put the trigger bar right in place. You don't have to sit here. There are some triggers on the market, the design of them, you have to pry and pry, get the bar in place. We gave ours just enough movement, and it's very, very, very minimal, very tight. It's not going to affect the trigger pull. You can't get it offset. For those of you who may wonder that, you actually have to shove pretty hard to get it in there, but once it's in there, you're good. Now, what I like to do is go ahead and put the trigger pivot and the trigger return spring in. Start it on the left side. There's two ways of doing this. You can do it with a dummy pin using your other punch, or you can do it with pliers. Now I do it with the pliers. I've been doing this for a very long time though. What I do is I take my pliers, I cant the return spring, which the L shape of the return spring is going to face forward in the chassis and sit on the flat piece in front of the trigger, right there. So I like to take that, a little bit of a cant, put it in. Too much cant. It's a little tricky, but it's actually, this is probably the easiest way. Push it in, and with your thumb, push the trigger pivot. Now you'll see, I got it started. Other way of doing this, because all you're gonna do from there is you're just gonna take your flathead, push the spring over onto the trigger pivot, tap it with your polymer hammer, get it all lined up, push the spring over so you can line up the holes, and then just tap it on through. Alright, now the other way of doing this is to use a slave pin. If you don't have a ready cut slave pin ready, you can do it with your 1/16 punch. Now, here's the thing, you're still going to need the pliers to push that in. It's really hard to do it without pliers. But once you have that in there, you can set it with your dummy pin. You'll start your dummy pin out just enough to get, oh, helps if I grab the right pin, doesn't it? Your trigger pivot pin in place, and you're just going to slowly tap. See, we tap too hard, that's what happens. What you'll do is you'll slowly tap it through. I get a little excited, preoccupied, and I end up doing it. So for me, this has always been the easiest way to do it. But that's how you use the slave pen. Gently tap through, it'll ride on through, good to go. Personally, this is the easiest way. If you can get the stupid pin to line up and cooperate with you. Sometimes it doesn't want to. Line it up. That's wanting to camp back a little bit. This is going to be probably, other than resetting the sear spring, this is probably about the worst part of doing this entire thing. Alright, we're all lined up. Make sure we're lined up on the right side. Tap it home. You want it to be flush. You don't want, you don't want it to be flush on one side and recessed on the other. So if you're flush on one side, just take your pen, tap it, don't hammer it. Just give a little tap. And you want about an equal amount of recess on both sides. That way the pen can't walk on you. Alright, so we're done with that part of the frame for now. We're going to move on to the trickiest part, installing the hammer spring. Now, first thing you'll do, take off your ejector, set it off to the side. Next thing you're going to do, you're going to want to depress the hammer some, push out the hammer spring, or correction, the hammer retaining pin. Alright. Hammer's going to come out. Make sure this thing's under a lot of spring tension. Don't just let the hammer go. Could whack you a good one. Pull out your lifter. I'm going to push out this little 1/16 inch pin. That's your sear sits on that pin and pivots right there. Now, word of caution, do not remove this spring. That is your sear return spring. It's designed a specific way. The curvature of this spring goes this direction because it's going to lay against the sear housing this way and pivot downwards. A lot of people have a tendency to take this out and put the flat part facing forward instead of the curved, and you're going to end up with malfunctions. It's not going to function correctly. Let's go ahead and turn our housing upside down, and your hammer spring will fall out. You've got your seat bearing on one side, you got your cup on the other. All right, your cup's just like a standard 1911 cup. It engages with the hammer strut. We're going to pull those two pieces off, set that aside. Now we're going to pull out the snow grease again. Remember when I said don't go overboard with the grease, but it comes in handy when you're putting in the hammer spring. What we're going to do is we're going to grease the inside of the spring enough to where it holds this piece in place, because it will, you know, it's not meant to snap in on the stock spring. It's not going to snap in on this spring either, and what will happen is it'll come out and get crooked inside the sear housing because it has enough room in that big hole to move around, and then it's not going to seat properly. You're not going to get proper function of the firearm. I'm going to pull that off just a little bit. That's it, just enough. And this spring is the same on both ends. Does not matter which end you stick in. Now, it's not going to hold it if I shake it a whole bunch, but it's going to hold it enough to where we can seat it. Take your hammer cup, put it in the other side. Take your housing, push it in. Alright, now, next thing you're going to want to install is a little tricky. You want to put your sear in. Remember, we don't want to pull that spring out, but you also have to almost compress it at the same time. Now this is easily done. It's a lot easier to do using your 1/16 punch as a slave pin, so that it keeps everything lined up. Now you may run into a little bit of resistance when you go to do this because the spring might come off set. If it comes off set and you can't get that all the way in, do not panic. Just move the spring up and down, but don't take it out. Alright, so once you have that seated, next thing we're going to put in, don't push all the way through just yet. We're going to take this. This is part of the hammer actuation. Pushes forward and whatnot. Make sure you line it up. And then go ahead and push that pin home. The spring's going to want to make it a little cockeyed from time to time. No big deal. Now, take your hammer pin, put it through the right side blocker, or actuator I should say, which is now wanting to give me fits. Yeah, so this can happen. What has happened here is it's cocked itself up a little bit at an angle. So what you're going to need to do is push this pin back out just enough to pull out the actuator, place it back in, push the pin back through, being sure to keep a hold of that actuator because it does like to move around quite a bit. Alright, now that we have that, we've got the actuator lined up with the right side of the housing. Go ahead and put your pin in just to get it started. I'm going to put our hammer, make sure your hammer strut lines up with the cup, push it in, get it started. Back it up just a little bit to where we can get our lifter in. Alright, see the amount of space I have there? That's what you're going to want. Now your lifter, this cutout is going to go forward. This is going to line up with the hammer pin, and there's the lifter itself. So we're going to put this in just like so. It's going to catch on the bottom part of the sear. That's where it's supposed to go. That's where the cutout goes. I'm going to push the hammer down. I'm going to get our spring wiggled into place. Now if it's being real difficult, just make sure you line it up a little bit. Get lined up properly. Give it a couple taps. And sometimes what will happen is you have to pull the hammer enough to where the inner, there's a retainer on the inside where the hammer strut connects. You're never going to pull it out, but what will happen is you've got to move the hammer some because it gets in the way. And that's usually when you're putting the pin in. What I just had was, it was just being difficult. So we know we're right. The hammer moves. We're going to put our ejector back on. All right, take your ejector, or correction, your sear and hammer housing. Get it started in the frame. Take your trigger bar. You're going to see this cut out here. Matches this. Get the trigger bar on in there. Get the housing started in the frame. And now, here's where you want to stop. Take just a second. You'll see, it's very hard to see in the video, but you'll see your trigger return spring, or correction, your trigger bar return spring right there. There's a small cutout in the bottom of the trigger bar, and you want that spring to line up with that cutout. If it doesn't, you're not going to get proper reset. Put your ejector on, push it down in, and take your housing pin retaining pin. Pardon me, haven't had enough coffee today. It's starting to get to me a little bit. All right, so we've got our pin in. Again, we don't want it just flush on one side. You don't have to push it all the way through. That's what the bearing on the bottom of the hammer spring is going to do, is it's going to pop into the cutout on that right there. Now, we're all together here. So now we're going to go ahead and put our slide on and adjust our trigger. Now, didn't adjust it at all before we put it in. We just went ahead and Loctited everything and put the trigger in. So now we're going to adjust the pre and post travel. This is where our .50 Allen wrench is going to come in handy. Just to be safe, we're going to go ahead and make sure no ammo magically jumped in. And we're going to get started. Now, we're getting no reset right off the bat. So we've got our pre-travel screw sticking out. We're going to start quarter turn at a time. Rack it, release. Still no reset. So hold the trigger back. Another quarter turn. Rack. No reset. So you're going to do that until you actually get reset. Now here's the thing. You can't just adjust these screws to wherever you want. That's going to be within the tolerances of the pistol itself. While this is going to remove pre and post travel, we can only do so much within the injected frame. These frames are injected plastic. So if it's not breaking exactly where you want it, it's not resetting exactly where you want it, you have to go within the tolerances of the pistol. Now we're just about there. As you can see, it wants to reset as long as I let it spring forward real hard. Another quarter turn. And since our hammer's not dropping, and we know this unless we rack the slide, we're going to go ahead and adjust that over travel. And that's where you want to start at. You want to start where the hammer won't fall. We're going to go a quarter turn counterclockwise until the hammer falls. Alright, it kind of fell, but it was slow. That means that the screw was hitting the plastic part of the frame, but you kind of had to dig it in a little. So we're going to go ahead and give it one more quarter turn, try it, and that's good. That's where it needs to be. Rack your pistol, you'll hear your reset click, and your trigger is set. Now, the Antioch series, I really love the flat face. I prefer a flat face trigger myself. It's much faster than a rounded trigger. But the biggest thing we've added are the catches here for your finger. Keeps your finger from slipping off the bottom of the trigger. The other thing that we did is we shortened this trigger over other designs so that you have more clearance. What would happen is people with larger hands and larger fingers would be pulling the trigger, finger would rotate off the end, and as you come up, it would catch between the trigger and this very small amount of clearance that you had right there in the trigger well. Great trigger, great system. We'll have a video up in the next week or two. I'm going to leave this. This is one of our in-shop guns. This is one of our in-house guns. I'm going to leave the performance spring kit in it. I'm going to leave the flat face in it, and I'll do a video to let you know how it works. You can get both of these products, all the performance parts, at www.gallowayprecision.com. Should be coming across the bottom of your screen right about now. Look under Sig Performance Parts for the P290rs. One last note on the Antioch series of pistols, they only work with the P290rs. They will not work with the old model 290. We've specifically designed it that way. 290 hasn't been made in years, but there are still some of them out there. If you have a standard 290 that is not the restrike capable system, if you own it and you call Sig, you can send it into the factory and they will retrofit it and update it to the RS series. They will make it correct. So again, only the 290rs for the Antioch series. Both triggers, the curve and the flat face Antioch, are up on the website right now. If you've got any questions, shoot me an email, tech, at gallowayprecision.com. That's Tango Echo Charlie Hotel at gallowayprecision.com. That should be coming across the bottom of the screen shortly. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter. Throw us a like. Tell us what you think about the products. Let us know what you guys are looking for. We base a lot of what we do off of what people are looking for. We wouldn't be around if you guys didn't buy our products and tell us what you needed. So that wraps up the installation of the Antioch trigger series and the 290rs performance spring set. So this is Brandon signing off. As always, be accurate, be safe, and God bless.